Only flies landed on her wounds. Shell Raven lay motionless beneath the rusted ventilation ducts, her blue skin dulled by grime and dried fluids. The maintenance tunnels of Carroll Station 7 groaned around her, the century-old orbital outpost shifting and settling like an ancient beast. Her bioluminescent markings, once vibrant patterns across her forehead and arms that had captivated audiences throughout the quadrant, now flickered weakly, intermittent pulses of light that betrayed her fading life force. She didn't know how many cycles she had been here. The flies had found her first, drawn to the sweet copper scent of her wounds. They landed delicately on the gashes across her torso, where the security drones had sliced her during the last sweep. The metal collar fused to her neck, standard procedure for non-human refugees, pinged softly, a rhythmic reminder of her status. Disposable, forgotten, irrelevant. Carroll Station had once been a bustling waypoint between the core systems and the outer reaches. But decades after the interstellar conflicts had ceased, it existed merely as a bureaucratic afterthought. The station's upper levels still functioned with sterile efficiency, processing cargo and maintaining appearance, while the lower maintenance tunnels rotted from neglect. Perfect place to dispose of a troublesome refugee whose papers had been misplaced. Shell Raven's species, the Lumina, were valued for their natural bioluminescence and musical abilities, until they weren't. The post-war treaties had relegated her kind to refugee status, tolerated but unwelcome. Their homeworld, now a restricted military zone. She had been an entertainer once, her voice and light shows renowned for their beauty. Now her voice was gone, stolen by trauma and the collar's suppression field, and her light was fading. She closed her eyes against the dim emergency strips that cast the tunnel in sickly amber. The flies continued their explorations across her wounds. Shell Raven accepted their presence as the harbingers of her end. At least something found value in her remains. Then came the sound, different from the station's constant moans and shudders. A rhythmic echo, mechanical at first, then shifting to something organic. Footfalls. Human. Shell Raven didn't move. Couldn't move. What was the point? Another station worker come to dispose of waste. Perhaps. She would be just another piece of detritus to clear. Her eyelids remained shut, waiting for the final indignity, to be bagged and ejected into space without ceremony. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. She sensed a presence hovering above her. The flies scattered momentarily, then resumed their feast. Still alive. The voice was male, quiet, rough from disuse, not the clipped professional tones of station security, nor the harried cadence of maintenance crews. Something else. Someone else. Shell Raven forced her eyelids open. Through the blur of exhaustion and dehydration, she made out a human form crouched beside her. Tall, thin, with unkempt hair and a face obscured by a half-mask respirator. Standard equipment in the lower tunnels, where air filtration systems had long since failed. She waited for the revulsion, the retreat, perhaps even a mercy kill. She didn't expect what came next. The human reached forward, a tentative hand extending toward her neck, toward the collar. Every instinct screamed for her to flinch away, but weakness kept her still. His fingers traced the edge of the metal band, finding the identification chip embedded there. Not authorized personnel, not maintenance, not security. The human's eyes narrowed above his respirator. Refugee status, Lumina. He sat back on his heels, studying her. His gaze wasn't clinical or disgusted, but curious, assessing. Then he did something truly unexpected. He removed a canteen from his utility belt and carefully lifted her head. Drink. The water touched her cracked lips, and instinct took over. Shell Raven sipped weakly, the cool liquid both painful and life-giving against her parched throat. I'm Viron Tade. The human replaced the cap on his canteen. Can you speak? Shell Raven stared back. Silent. The collar hummed. Speech had been denied her for so long that she wasn't certain she remembered how, even if the collar's suppression field were removed. No matter. Viron glanced up and down the tunnel. Can't stay here. They'll sweep again, eventually. Without further explanation, he slid his arms beneath her broken body. Pain flared across her wounds, and her markings flashed a bright distress pattern before dimming again. The human noticed, but didn't stop. With surprising gentleness for his lanky frame, he lifted her. My quarters aren't far, hidden, safe. Shalraven had no choice but to trust, or at least, to endure. As he carried her through the labyrinthine tunnels, she observed him through half-lidded eyes. His movements were confident but cautious. Someone intimately familiar with these forgotten passages. His breathing was steady, controlled. Not station security, certainly. Not maintenance. An exile, perhaps. Like herself. Someone who had found a way to exist in the margins. The journey seemed endless, each step sending fresh waves of agony through her body. Eventually, they reached a section of wall that appeared unremarkable until Viron pressed a specific pattern against a maintenance panel. A hidden door slid open, revealing a space beyond. Viron's quarters were surprisingly civilized, given their location deep within the station's neglected bowels. The small chamber had been converted from an old monitoring room. Screens still lined one wall, though they no longer displayed station metrics, but rather a patchwork of security feeds, upper levels, docking bays, patrol schedules. A narrow cot occupied one corner. Shelves held an assortment of scavenged items, tools, medical supplies, preserved food packets, books, actual physical books, a rarity in this digital age. He laid her carefully on the cot, mindful of her wounds. Not much, but it's safe. Been here 3 years. No one comes looking. Shalraven's bioluminescence flickered questioningly. Why help her? What did he want in return? In her experience, humans never gave without expecting something back, usually more than was originally offered. As if reading her thoughts, Viron moved away, giving her space. Rest. I'll clean those wounds when you're ready. Food later. He settled into a chair before the screens, his back to her, a deliberate pose of non-threat. Shalraven watched him warily until exhaustion claimed her again, pulling her into the first peaceful darkness she had known in months. She woke to the smell of something warm and savory. Her eyes opened to find Viron sitting nearby, a bowl of steaming liquid in his hands. The respirator was gone, revealing a face younger than she had expected, with a neatly trimmed beard and deep-set eyes that had seen too much. Protein soup. He offered the bowl. Nothing special, but it's clean and nutritious. Shalraven struggled to sit up. Pain shot through her torso, and her markings flashed erratically. Viron set the bowl aside and helped her, arranging a makeshift backrest from a folded blanket. The cuts are deep but clean now. No infection. I treated them while you slept. He retrieved the bowl. You've been unconscious for 26 hours. 26 hours of vulnerability. And he had only treated her wounds. No restraints. No invasive procedures. No exploitation of her helplessness. Shalraven's people were empaths of a sort. Not mind readers, but sensitive to emotional currents. She sensed no malice from him, only a watchful caution and something else. Loneliness, perhaps. She accepted the bowl with shaking hands and sipped cautiously. The broth was bland, but warming, and her body craved the sustenance. As she drank, Viron busied himself at one of his workstations, apparently giving her the dignity of eating without scrutiny. The collar needs to come off, he said without turning. It's sending locator pings. Dormant now, but they'll activate it during the next sweep. I've been blocking the signal, but that's temporary. Shalraven's hand flew to her neck, fingers tracing the smooth metal that had been fused to her skin upon processing. The collar served multiple functions: identification, tracking, and for certain species like hers, suppression of abilities deemed potentially destabilizing. For Lumina, that meant dampening their natural bioluminescent communication and, in some cases, their voices. Viron turned, holding a slender tool that resembled a tuning fork. This is a sonic key. I modified it from maintenance equipment. It can disrupt the molecular bonds of the collar without damaging your tissue. He hesitated. It will hurt, but it's necessary if you want to remain undetected. Remaining undetected meant remaining alive. Shalraven nodded once, setting aside the half-finished soup. Viron approached slowly. I need to touch your neck. Is that acceptable? The question startled her. When had anyone last asked her permission for anything? She nodded again, tilting her head to expose the collar fully. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as they probed the seam where metal met flesh. The collar had been designed to fuse partially with the wearer's skin, making removal both difficult and painful, another deterrent against escape. Viron positioned the sonic key against a specific point and activated it. The pain was immediate and intense. Shalraven's markings blazed bright blue in distress, illuminating the small room with harsh light. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting the metallic flavor of her own blood. Almost there, Viron murmured, his concentration absolute. The primary bond is releasing. Another wave of agony washed over her as the key's vibrations separated metal from tissue. Then, suddenly, blessed relief as the collar split along an invisible seam. Viron carefully removed it from her neck, revealing the raw, reddened skin beneath. Done. He set the hated device aside. I'll neutralize the tracker completely later. Shalraven's hands flew to her throat, feeling the absence of the collar's weight for the first time in years. Her markings pulsed with emotion, relief, disbelief, gratitude, and something else stirred within her, something she had thought forever lost. Her voice. She opened her mouth, but nothing emerged save a dry rasp. The physical capacity might be restored, but the psychological barriers remained. How long had it been since she had formed words? Since she had been allowed to speak? It will come back, Viron said quietly. When you're ready. He applied a soothing salve to the irritated skin of her neck. For now, rest. You're safe here. Safe. Such a foreign concept. Shalraven's markings dimmed as exhaustion claimed her once more. The next days passed in a routine of healing and cautious coexistence. Viron tended her wounds, provided clean clothes scavenged from abandoned crew quarters, and shared his meager rations without complaint. He spoke little, but always quietly, as if excess volume might shatter the fragile peace between them. He never pressed her for information, never demanded her story. Gradually, Shalraven began to observe her unlikely savior. Viron moved with the precise efficiency of someone trained in technical work. Yet his hands possessed a healer's gentleness. The screens he monitored revealed his intimate knowledge of the station's systems and security protocols. Not a common maintenance worker. Then, something more specialized. Her voice remained elusive, trapped behind years of enforced silence, but her strength returned incrementally. Soon, she could sit without assistance, then stand, then take faltering steps around the small quarters. Her bioluminescence strengthened, the patterns becoming more deliberate, more controlled. In the darkness of their hidden sanctuary, her blue glow often provided their only illumination, casting Viron's features in ethereal light as he worked. On the 7th day, he returned from one of his scavenging expeditions with something clutched carefully in his hand. For you. He held out a small pot containing a plant, an actual living thing with delicate green leaves. Found it in an abandoned hydroponics section. Still alive, somehow. Shalraven accepted the gift with wonder, her markings pulsing with delight. Life, persistent and determined, like herself. She placed it on the shelf beside her cot, where it could catch the artificial light from the screens. That night, as Viron slept in his makeshift bed on the floor, having insisted she keep the cot, Raven studied the plant's simple beauty and made a decision. "Thank you." The words emerged as barely a whisper, rusty from disuse, but audible in the quiet room. Viron's eyes opened immediately, finding her in the darkness by the gentle glow of her markings. "You're welcome," he replied simply, asking for nothing more, demanding no further speech. But the dam had broken. Over the following days, words began to return, hesitant at first. Then, with growing confidence, single words became phrases, then sentences. Her voice, once renowned for its melodic quality, remained rougher than before, bearing the scars of her ordeal. But it was hers again. With speech came sharing, carefully, like someone testing thin ice. Raven began to offer pieces of herself. "I was an entertainer," she told Viron one evening as they shared a rare treat. Actual tea, made from dried leaves he had discovered. "My light and voice together. People came from many systems to witness the performances." Viron nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I can imagine. Your patterns are remarkable." "And you," she ventured. "What brought you to this place?" A shadow crossed his features. "I was a structural auditor, certified to evaluate stations, ships, habitats for safety compliance." His mouth twisted in a humorless smile. "Until I actually did my job too well." He explained how he had discovered critical flaws in Carroll Station's design, weaknesses that threatened catastrophic decompression in the lower levels where the poorest residents were housed. His reports were buried, his certifications revoked on trumped-up charges of procedural violations. Rather than accept reassignment to a remote mining operation, effectively exile, he had disappeared into the very sections he had tried to protect, using his intimate knowledge of the station to survive undetected. 3 years in these tunnels, he concluded, listening to the station groan and waiting for the collapse that will eventually come. "Why stay?" Raven asked. Viron shrugged. "Where else would I go? My credentials are void. My reputation destroyed." He glanced at the security feeds. "Besides, I've made a difference in small ways. Rerouted emergency systems to the lower levels. Warned people before major sweeps. And rescued dying refugees," she added softly. Their eyes met across the small space, understanding passing between them. Both outcasts. Both betrayed by systems meant to protect. Both finding small rebellions in continued survival. The moment was shattered by a sudden blaring alarm from Viron's security array. He lunged for the controls, fingers flying across the interface. "Patrol drones," he muttered. Full sweep of the lower sections. Looking for something specific. His eyes widened as he decoded the alert. "Your caller. They've activated the tracker remotely." Raven's markings flashed in alarm. "But you removed it." "Yes, but I haven't had time to fully neutralize it." Viron grabbed the collar from his workbench. "They know it's in this section. The signal is still active." "What do we do?" Viron was already gathering items into a small pack. "We need to move. They'll triangulate the signal soon." "Move where?" Panic edged her voice. "There's nowhere to go. The station." "Has escape routes," Viron interrupted. "Maintenance tunnels that lead to emergency evacuation points. Most are defunct, but I've kept one operational, just in case." He pulled a worn tablet from beneath a floor panel and activated it. A station schematic appeared, highlighting a pathway through the lower sections to a small docking area. "There's a scout pod there. Basic life support. Minimal navigation, but enough to reach the nearest outpost." He looked up at her. "We'll have about 20 minutes once they pinpoint the caller's location. Can you travel?" Raven stood, testing her strength. Her wounds had healed enough for movement, though prolonged exertion would be challenging. "Yes." "Good." Viron handed her a dark coverall and cap. Put these on. They'll help mask your bioluminescence. As she dressed, Viron continued preparations, stuffing the pack with water, emergency rations, medical supplies, and tools. Last, he placed the plant in a small protective container and added it to the pack. "Ready?" he asked, shouldering the bag. Shalraven nodded, pulling the cap low over her forehead to hide her distinctive markings. Together, they slipped from the hidden quarters into the maintenance tunnels beyond. The journey was tense and treacherous. Viron led them through passages so narrow they had to crawl, up access ladders that groaned under their weight, and across catwalks suspended over yawning mechanical chasms. All the while, the station's alert system continued its muted warning, the sound growing more insistent as they moved. "They've pinpointed the signal," Viron whispered, as they paused at a junction. "Patrol drones dispatched to this sector." Shalraven's enhanced hearing caught the faint whir of mechanical wings. "How much further?" "2 more sections." Viron consulted his tablet. "Through the old recycling plant and down to docking bay 12. The recycling plant loomed before them, a cavernous space filled with decommissioned processing units. Once, it had converted the station's waste into usable materials. Now, it stood as a monument to neglect, its machines frozen in mid-cycle decades ago. They were halfway across when the first drone appeared, its searchlight cutting through the gloom. Viron yanked Shalraven behind a massive filtration unit just as the beam swept past. "Standard patrol pattern," he breathed against her ear. "It will make 3 sweeps, then move to the next quadrant." They watched as the drone executed its programmed search, mechanical precision in every movement. True to Viron's prediction, after the 3rd pass, it moved toward an adjacent section. "Now!" Viron urged, and they darted from cover, making for the far exit. They were meters from safety when Shalraven's foot caught on a piece of debris. She stumbled, catching herself against a rusted console, which collapsed under her weight with a resounding crash. The drone reversed course immediately, its searchlight finding them with unerring accuracy. A high-pitched whine indicated weapon systems activating. "Run!" Viron shoved her toward the exit as the drone fired, the energy pulse sizzling past them to impact the wall beyond. They fled through corridors that grew increasingly decrepit, the station's neglect more apparent with each turn. Behind them, the drone's pursuit was joined by others, their synchronized movements closing the net around the escapees. "There!" Viron pointed ahead to a sealed door marked with faded evacuation symbols. "Bay 12. They reached the door as energy pulses struck the wall beside them, showering them with fragments of decaying metal. Viron slammed his hand against the access panel, but it remained dark, unresponsive. "Power's out," he muttered, dropping to his knees and prying open the manual override compartment. "Have to do this the hard way." The drones were closing in, their weapons charging for another volley. Shalraven pressed herself against the wall beside Viron, watching his fingers work with desperate speed to cross-wire the ancient mechanism. "Almost." The panel sparked under his ministrations. "Got it." The door slid open halfway, then stuck. Viron wedged himself into the gap, straining to create enough space for them to pass. "Go!" Shalraven squeezed through the opening, Viron following close behind as energy pulses struck the door, melting its edges. They found themselves in a small, auxiliary docking bay. Most of the ports were empty, their indicators dark. But at the far end, a single light glowed green above a compact vessel. "The scout pod," Viron confirmed, already moving toward it. "Basic but functional." The pod was indeed rudimentary, little more than a pressurized capsule with minimal controls, designed for short-range evacuation rather than extended travel. But it represented their only chance. Viron pressed his palm against the entry scanner. To Shalraven's surprise, the hatch responded, sliding open with a hiss of equalized pressure. "You have authorization?" she asked as they clambered inside. "Modified credentials." Viron settled into the pilot seat, fingers dancing across the activation sequence. Part of my contingency planning. The pod hummed to life, systems initializing with reassuring efficiency. Outside, the sound of drones breaching the bay door echoed ominously. "Strap in," Viron instructed, engaging the launch sequence. "This will be rough." Shal Raven secured herself in the co-pilot's seat as Viron released the docking clamps. The pod shuddered, then dropped into launch position. Through the viewport, she could see the bay's exterior doors beginning to cycle open, and the first of the patrol drones entering the bay behind them. "Hold on!" Viron punched the emergency launch override, bypassing the standard departure protocols. The pod shot forward, acceleration pressing them back into their seats as they rocketed through the barely opened bay doors. A warning klaxon blared, protesting the unsafe departure. But they were already clear of the station, hurtling into the star-speckled void beyond. Behind them, energy pulses lanced from the bay, the drones firing in a last attempt to disable their escape vessel. One glanced off the pod's stern, sending it into a momentary spin before Viron regained control. "Tracking systems?" Shal Raven asked, scanning the unfamiliar controls. "Limited range." Viron adjusted their course, putting the bulk of the station between them and pursuit. "We'll be out of their sensor range in minutes. After that, we're just another piece of debris." The danger wasn't over. Carroll Station might still dispatch pursuit vessels, but for the moment, they had achieved the impossible: escape. As the station receded behind them, becoming just another distant structure against the backdrop of stars, Shal Raven felt something unfamiliar bloom within her chest. Hope. In the pod's cramped confines, they took inventory of their situation. The vessel had enough life support for 3 weeks at minimal consumption levels. Its navigation system was basic but functional, capable of plotting a course to the nearest registered outposts. Fuel reserves were adequate for a single sustained burn to their destination. "Where can we go?" Shal Raven asked, studying the star chart displayed on the main console. "Most outposts will have security agreements with Carroll Station." Viron nodded, his expression thoughtful. "True, but there are alternatives." He indicated a point on the chart, seemingly empty space. "Here, the Careen Drift." "I don't see anything." "Exactly. It's not on official charts." A faint smile crossed his features. "It's a settlement established by deserters, refugees, and others who needed to disappear, built inside a hollowed asteroid cluster. Self-sufficient, off-grid." "How do you know of it?" "I certified the life support systems." His smile broadened slightly. "Officially, I was evaluating an automated mining operation. Unofficially, let's just say I've maintained contacts there. People who might welcome 2 more souls, seeking a fresh start." Shal Raven studied him. This human who had risked everything to save a stranger, who had plans within plans, who had survived alone in the shadows for years. "You never intended to stay on Carroll Station forever." "No." Viron's gaze was steady. "I was waiting for the right moment, the right reason." The implication hung between them, unspoken but understood. She had become that reason, not through any deliberate action, but through the simple coincidence of their paths crossing. Or perhaps not coincidence at all, but something more like fate. Viron programmed the coordinates, and the pod's engines hummed as they adjusted course. The journey would take just over 2 weeks at their current speed, 2 weeks of close quarters, limited resources, and the vast emptiness of space surrounding them. In that emptiness, they found connection. The first days passed in companionable silence, punctuated by practical conversation, monitoring systems, rationing supplies, treating the lingering tenderness of Shal Raven's healing wounds. But as the immediate danger of pursuit faded and the rhythm of space travel settled around them, words began to flow more freely. They exchanged stories, hers of a world bathed in perpetual twilight, where the lumina evolved their bioluminescence, of concerts where light and sound intertwined to create experiences that transcended language. His of growing up on a terraformed moon, where structural integrity meant survival, of finding beauty in mathematical certainty and engineering precision. I miss the music most. Shalraven confessed one cycle as they shared a meal of reconstituted protein. Not performing for others, but the act of creation itself, bringing something new into existence through voice and light. Viron considered this. Can you still create that way, without an audience? She hesitated. I don't know. The collar suppressed those abilities for so long. And before that, the refugee processing centers. Her markings dimmed with the memory. Creation requires safety, space to breathe. We have space here, Viron said quietly. Small, but unmonitored, free. That night, as the pod drifted through the void on autopilot and Viron slept, Shalraven experimented. Tentatively at first, she allowed her markings to pulse with deliberate patterns, not the involuntary flashes of emotion, but controlled sequences that had once been part of her art. The soft blue light filled the cabin, dancing across surfaces in rhythmic waves. Then, barely audible, she began to hum. The sound was uncertain, wavering, but it merged with the light patterns, reinforcing and complementing them. The melody grew stronger, her voice finding its forgotten power. By the time Viron stirred awake, she was singing softly, her markings pulsing, in perfect synchronization with the haunting tune. He watched in silence, transfixed by the display. When the final notes faded and the light dimmed to its normal ambient glow, he said simply, "Beautiful." Shalraven's markings flushed briefly with pleasure. It's returning, not as it was, but something new. Something better, perhaps, Viron suggested. Forged through hardship, like all lasting things. The observation struck her as profoundly true. She was not the same being who had performed for adoring crowds across the quadrant. That version of herself had been lost in the refugee camps, in the processing centers, in the maintenance tunnels of Carroll Station. But from those ashes, something else was emerging, something harder, wiser, more resilient. As the days passed, they settled into a routine that maximized their limited resources while preserving their sanity in the confined space. Viron maintained the pod systems with meticulous care, squeezing extra efficiency from the life support and navigation arrays. Shalraven practiced her voice and light work, creating moments of transcendent beauty in the sterile environment. Together, they tended the small plant Viron had rescued from the station. It thrived under their attention, putting forth new leaves despite the artificial conditions. They named it Persistence, a living symbol of their journey. On the 12th day, as they made minute adjustments to their course, a comfortable silence between them, Shalraven asked the question that had lingered unspoken since their escape. What happens when we reach Kareen Drift? Viron's hands stilled on the controls. What do you want to happen? The question caught her off guard. What did she want? For so long, mere survival had consumed all her energy and focus. The luxury of desire, of preference, of choice had been denied her. Now, faced with possibilities, she found herself uncertain. I want... She searched for words that could encapsulate the nebulous feelings within her. I want to create again, to be heard, to contribute something meaningful. Her markings pulsed softly. And I want to be where you are. The admission surprised them both. Viron turned to her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. I would like that, he said simply. Very much. It wasn't a declaration of love. Not yet. They were both too scarred, too cautious for such leaps. But it was an acknowledgement of connection, of mutual choice, of a shared path forward. For two beings who had lost everything, it was enough. More than enough. The remaining days of their journey passed with new awareness between them, small touches lingering longer than necessary, shared glances, heavy with unspoken meaning, the unconscious synchronization of movements in their limited space. They were orbiting each other, drawing closer with each revolution, gravity inexorable. On the final day, the navigation system chimed, indicating their approach to the coordinates Viron had entered. Through the viewport, there appeared to be nothing, just empty space against the backdrop of distant stars. "Are you certain?" Shalraven asked, scanning the apparent void. Viron nodded, activating a specific frequency on the communication array. "Watch." He transmitted a series of pulses, not words, but a mathematical sequence. Seconds stretched into minutes with no response. Then, just as doubt began to creep in, the star field before them shifted. It was subtle at first, a shimmer like heat distortion. Then, the illusion fell away, revealing what had been hidden beneath, a cluster of asteroids, their surfaces dotted with lights and structures. Holographic camouflage, sophisticated enough to fool most passing vessels. A voice crackled over the comm system. "Unidentified pod. State your purpose and authorization." "Viron Tade," he responded. "Certification code Epsilon 17 Sigma 42. Requesting asylum for myself and one companion." A pause, then, "Tade, the auditor?" Surprise colored the voice. "Thought you'd gone down with Carroll Station." "Not yet," Viron replied, "though I wouldn't recommend vacation property there." A rough laugh came through the speakers. "Always did appreciate your assessments. Hold position for escort." Two small vessels detached from the asteroid cluster, moving to flank the pod. Lights flashed in sequence, not threats, but guidance, directing them toward a concealed docking bay carved into the largest asteroid. As they approached, details became visible. What had appeared from a distance as random structures revealed themselves as an intricate, organic settlement. Solar arrays extended from the asteroid's surfaces, capturing energy from the distant sun. Hydroponic gardens glowed behind transparent domes. Living quarters and community spaces were nestled within the rock itself, protected from radiation and micrometeorites. "It's beautiful," Shalraven breathed, her markings pulsing with wonder. "Like a coral reef in space." Viron smiled. "That's exactly what it is. A living community, adapting to its environment, rather than forcing the environment to adapt to it." The docking procedure was smooth and efficient. As the pod settled into its berth, environmental systems synced automatically, equalizing pressure and atmosphere. The hatch opened to reveal a greeting party of three, two humans and a Centaurian, their expressions curious, but not hostile. "Welcome to Careen Drift," said the foremost human, a woman with silver-streaked hair and the weathered complexion of someone who had spent decades in space. "I'm Captain Alara Moore, Settlement Coordinator. This is Dr. Keel, our Medical Officer, and Taven, Security Chief." The introductions continued as they were led from the docking bay into the settlement proper. Shalraven's initial apprehension faded as she observed the easy integration of different species throughout the community. Humans worked alongside Centaurians, Pravasi, and even a few other Lumina, all focused on maintaining their shared home, rather than enforcing arbitrary hierarchies. They were given temporary quarters, a small but comfortable space carved from the asteroid's interior and furnished with recycled materials. There was water for washing, clean clothes, and the promise of a community meal later. "Rest," Captain Moore advised. "Tomorrow, we'll discuss how you fit into our little ecosystem. Everyone contributes according to their abilities here." Left alone, Shalraven and Viron explored their new sanctuary. It was larger than the pod, certainly, though modest by any standard. But it was theirs, a space where no one monitored their movements or restricted their choices. Viron carefully removed persistence from its travel container, placing it on a shelf near the room's light source. It survived, he noted with satisfaction. Like us. Raven stepped closer, her shoulder brushing his as they regarded the small plant. What will we do here? Live, Viran said simply. Work. Create. Whatever we choose. Together? Her markings pulsed with the question she couldn't quite verbalize. Viran turned to her, his expression solemn but warm. If that's what you want, I would very much like that. Her answer came not in words, but in the gentle press of her hand against his, fingers intertwining. They stood that way for a long moment, contact speaking what language could not yet fully express. Trust, hope, possibility. The next days brought orientation into the settlement's routines. Kareen Drift operated on principles of mutual support and sustainability. Each resident contributed according to their skills and received according to their needs. Resources were limited, but carefully managed, allowing for modest comfort rather than luxury. Viran's expertise in structural engineering was immediately valuable. The settlement's infrastructure required constant maintenance and improvement, tasks he approached with dedication and insight. Within days, he was integrating into teams working on atmospheric regulation and habitat expansion. Raven's path was less obvious initially. Then a chance encounter revealed her gift. While exploring the central dome, where the settlement's main hydroponic garden flourished, she began to sing softly, her markings pulsing in harmony with the melody. Several children, human and non-human alike, stopped to watch, entranced by the display. Word spread quickly. By the following cycle, she was invited to share her art at the community gathering. Her performance, still tentative, still healing, but authentic, was met with appreciative silence, followed by genuine applause. We have technical specialists, engineers, doctors, Captain Moore told her afterward. But art reminds us why we do all this, why we build, why we endure. Soon, Raven was teaching classes to the settlement's children, showing them how light and sound could intertwine, how beauty could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. She worked with the agricultural team as well, discovering that certain plants responded to lumina bioluminescent frequencies, improving their growth and yield. Her days filled with purpose and connection. Weeks passed, then months. The temporary quarters became permanent as they added personal touches, salvaged artwork, modified furniture, small comforts created from recycled materials. They planted persistence in a community garden bed, watching it flourish in its new environment, putting forth blossoms that neither had expected. Their relationship evolved as organically as the plant they tended together. There was no dramatic declaration, no single moment of transformation, just the gradual intertwining of lives, the slow building of shared history and private language. Touch became familiar, comfort became expected, separate became together. One cycle, as they worked side by side in the garden dome, planting a new batch of seedlings in the rich soil created from the settlement's composted waste. Raven paused, her hands deep in the earth. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Helping me, leaving the station? Viran considered the question with his usual thoughtfulness. No, he said finally. I was existing there, not living, surviving, but alone. He looked at her, the filtered sunlight from the dome's panels casting dappled patterns across his face. Now I'm part of something connected. Raven's markings pulsed with affection. So am I. They continued planting in companionable silence, creating new life side by side. Around them, the settlement hummed with activity, children learning, engineers building, artists creating, all forming a tapestry of interdependent existence. Later, as they stood at the observation port, watching the endless starfield beyond, Viran's arm draped casually around her shoulders, Raven reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the maintenance tunnels where she had lain dying, with only flies landing on her wounds. To this moment of peace and belonging, it seemed impossible, yet undeniably real. "What are you thinking?" Viron asked, noting the thoughtful pattern of her bioluminescence. "That, sometimes," she said softly, "the universe sends exactly what we need, precisely when we've given up hope of receiving it." He considered this, then nodded. "Like finding a living plant in a derelict station. Or a compassionate human in a place of death," she added, leaning into his embrace. Beyond the port, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small lives played out in their light. But within the shelter of Careen Drift, within the circle of Viron's arms, Shalraven had found her place in that vast cosmos, not as an entertainer performing for faceless crowds, nor as a refugee denied voice and agency, but as herself, whole and healing, creating anew. Only flies had landed on her wounds once. Now, hands tended them with care. Eyes that had closed in expectation of death had opened to find life instead. And in that unexpected mercy, that simple act of human compassion, she had discovered not just survival, but rebirth. Together, they turned from the stars toward home, walking the corridors of their adopted community hand in hand, their shadows merging in the gentle blue light of her markings. Two beings who had found in each other not just rescue, but redemption. Not just companionship, but completion.